Today we're going to talk about performance, specifically creating. Creating is bringing something, a goal, an outcome, a capability, into being that doesn't exist yet. So when we set out to create something, we desire it first and then we create it. But creating requires two things that happen simultaneously. First, we need to be in the now. We need to be in the moment. Pay attention to what is currently going on. And in paying attention that way, it requires us to pay attention to our own thoughts. Because if we're eluded by or distracted by our versions of reality, we must teach reality to ourselves. And that's a choice that we make in the creative process, is to teach reality to ourselves. See, reality doesn't look for us. Reality isn't on the way in. It's here, it's now, it's present. But reality is something we have to learn, we have to teach to ourselves. And the reason why we don't like to say reality or state it as it is that we don't like what it says. And number two is we may have to change something. So if you're a business person listening to me, teams don't like to talk about reality. You know, our relationships, we don't talk about reality because we're so confronted by those two things. So you really have to position yourself to attend to reality. Now, that being said, in the New Age movement, there is this strong push for being in the now, being in the moment. And it's as if this is all there is. You get enlightenment, you have this everlasting sense of ever-present now and this well-being and all that. The problem I have with it is just choosing to be present is one part of a larger process. It isn't really what's involved in creating. It's one component. It's just incomplete. Certainly, we must observe and see reality for what it is. I just talked about that. Even though our minds drift, we go to thoughts, we ruminate, we check things out for a while, we make sense of things, we try to see our assumptions. Our minds are lazy. We have all sorts of concepts and expectations. Our minds are like a database. We have thoughts because we've had experience, and all those inferences and observations have delivered information to our memory. And when we come upon situations automatically just left to our own default pattern, we will just make sense of things by downloading naturally what's going on. There's conditioned thinking in this. We have conditioned habits in our judgment. And if we don't pay attention to our attention, then we won't be able to explain as best we can where we are compared to where we want to be. And when we're in the creative process, we have to be in the moment, but we also have to be in the future at the same time. And it's an essential executive discipline to pay attention to what is going on, because we have to be able to see the playing field. Speed is a defense against depth. We have so much speed, the need for speed, that we don't stop and actually think and then act. And I remember in scuba diving, when you learn how to dive in California, you have to be careful of the kelp forests. And if you ever get caught in kelp, one of the first things you learn is the more you rush and you try to get out of it in panic mode, the worse it gets. It'll tighten on you, and eventually it can become a real problem. But you have to stop, you have to think, and you have to act. And by slowing down, you actually get out of the puzzle. Well, it's the same thing a bit in creating. We have to stop, see what's really going on, while all at once we attend to our intention. What are we trying to create? And the relationship between these 2 points is where the creative act lives. There's movement there. There's tension that's seeking resolution. And I've talked about this in other programs where we have to hold tension over periods of time, and these things get difficult because, well, as we go forward and create things that we don't know how to do, we have to hold steady for periods of time where we have to learn and assimilate new skills, and there's frustration and setbacks and mistakes where we have to find ways through them and bring the current reality toward the vision. But we have to have a broad external focus, and this broad external focus is one way that we pay attention. We need to have a broad internal focus to be able to think and plan and analyze and evaluate and make strategic decisions on behalf of outcomes. Then we have to have a narrow focus, be able to narrow in on what's important and keep ourselves from being allured by distractions externally, internally, and narrow our focus into what's important and execute. And then actually execute in external reality is do it, get it done. So if I'm a chef, I throw all the food on the table. I take a broad external focus of what's there. And then I analyze and plan, what do I want to do? What do I want to create? And how am I going to create it? And what do I need for this? And where do I start? And what's my current reality? And I'm looking at that in current reality. I'm paying attention to the now. I'm being present. But I'm also holding an intention, asking the question, what do I want to create? Now, maybe something I want to create is different than what I know. So I start creating something, and by doing so, iteratively over and over, I take action. It works, it doesn't work, it works, it doesn't work. I take my identity out of the process. Because as I'm creating something, a sauce, a meal, a recipe, I don't need to worry about what I think about myself to bring that into reality. It doesn't matter what my opinion of myself is. So any thoughts, beliefs I have, negative beliefs I have about me, whether I'm good enough, whether I'm worthy, whether I'm adequate, those will have nothing to do with creating it. Even if I believe I'm powerless, the belief has nothing to do with predicting what is going to happen. I'm learning by doing it anyway. I'm starting separate from what I know. So there's no room for belief because I haven't created it yet. See, I'm amazed by how often we're taught in the New Age movement about beliefs and how they're so much of a problem. And why do we feed something like that? Energy follows attention. Why are we so attentive to the belief when we just have a belief? Beliefs are beliefs. We all have them. But it really isn't an issue until we make it an issue. And the beliefs are really not interested in us. We're very interested in the beliefs. So we have to have this broad internal focus, and we can't stay there too long or we'll start to go into negative thinking or go into those propensities. But again, we can move our attention more in the direction of what we're trying to bring into being, and this means we move from broad to narrow. And then we have internal, which is what matters, what's important internally. We focus on a detail. And then externally, we execute and bring it into being. So we have these 4 different types of concentration, actually. Broad external, broad internal. We have narrow internal and narrow external. We have analysis, we have awareness, and we have action, external and internal. And it's our ability to narrow our focus that really brings us to the task and then focuses our mind on what's important to get it done. But see, if we only take action without intention, then we're kind of a hopeless doer. We're knocking stuff out that has no meaning. It's not focused on an outcome. It does no service to a direction. It's got no place to go. And once you establish that place to go, now you have a focusing of the mind because you have a current reality. Let's say I'm making a cake. The cake doesn't exist yet. I don't know how to create this type of cake. That difference between what I know, don't know, and where I am and establishing a baseline from which I'm taking action and moving towards where I'm going, it really focuses the mind. See, it's often suggested that something is missing there. It really isn't. There's something trying to happen there. There's energy there to work with. And this takes training for sure. I mean, we have to learn to hold the space this way because our mind rebels. We just want to run on things that we already know, and so we try to be attainable and realistic and these kind of things. And it is unnatural, of course, to state reality just as it is. I mean, we have to report that to ourselves. And we're not doing nothing by just being present. We're doing something because we're on the way to something we want to create. It doesn't mean every moment needs to be justified either. There's going to be moments and improvising and impromptu surprises, and there's going to be a stranger in the creative process anyway. But the true discipline is to sharpen our focus and pay attention to what's right there in front of us now while we hold the space for what we're trying to create. And using these 4 ways of concentrating as a way to bring it into reality. But you know, in doing so, there's one factor that also gets interesting, and that is the level of stress that we're in. Because the stress level is brought on by the importance of the outcome. I mean, let's say that I'm now making a meal for a room full of 50 people and I've never made it before. That stress level is going to affect how I fluently shift my different domains of concentration. And we all have a preferred way of concentrating. So let's say that I have a very good broad external focus. It's one of my strengths. But that's what I typically go to. That's my go-to channel. And what happens is I start in on the process, but I wing it too much. So I just jump right off and I have too much going on without a plan. Or let's say I overthink things and I get paralysis by analysis because I rely on my broad internal focus. And as the stress goes up and my confidence is down because I haven't created it, that stress affects my ability to shift rapidly how I pay attention. The point is, pay attention to your attention. And we have different ways in which we pay attention. I've just named 4. And what stops us from being flexible to pay attention to the changing demands of the performance situation is that, 1, we're unaware of our propensities. We don't know our weakness, which is our best strength. We don't know our best attentional strength. And 2 is we haven't really built out the skillful means or done the situation iteratively enough to have the capability and confidence to relax our stress. Hence, when the importance of the outcome goes up, we tend to turn on the stress response, and then what happens when we get stressed is we get stuck in a particular way of paying attention. Let's say that I'm like a surgeon and I narrow my focus on one thing, but I don't see signals, or I don't look at current reality along the way and make adjustments, or I don't get feedback. I get too far into the tunnel vision, or, oh my gosh, a mistake happened in the kitchen, and oh my gosh, and all of a sudden it blows up on me, and that monkey wrench that was just thrown in the wheel, I'm overreacted to what's going on because I'm so narrow in tunnel vision that I'm very, very upset, like the gymnast on the balancing beam. It takes me a lot longer to recover. So what makes great performance capability is the ability to shift rapidly in the changing demands of the situation between these different ways of concentrating, from awareness to analysis to action, back and forth. And we all have a bias for one of these, and if we can just recognize that, we can position ourselves and have some attention control so that we can at will put our attention the right way into the creative processes that we effectuate. And a lot of us have spent many, many years of doing this. You know, we've heard the moment. You got to be in the moment. And that's great, but we can be so embedded in the moment that we don't make ourselves flexible or fluid enough to bring ourselves into the creative act. And so I think people are most happy when they're involved in creating the things that they want, and that we're very unhappy when we don't have a sense of the future. It kind of drives us crazy. And so it's like the future can also be a little too much, where it just drives us away from the present, and that's all you do is think about the future, then you're never really living in your life. So living in the future and living now are two components. You can't have one without the other. It's like a chair with a leg missing. And so there is a great thing about living in the now. And as things change in the now, we have to be observant about current reality. We need to be flexible and fluent in reality at all times. As I make something, the stage that it's in is going to change. And I have to be clear about that. I have to consolidate what's moved. I have to stretch and then consolidate and then see from here and compare it to what I want to create. And so it's not about peace of mind. It's not about paying attention to where you are, your moods and things, because then we get caught up in what's going on with us and we become lousier at creating. It's not about detachment either. We're not saying we're neutralizing the mind. We're actually being more present with reality, including the dynamics of the mind too. I can step back and observe the content of my thoughts, and I can practice that without getting caught in those thoughts. I can be a spectator or a witness, and I develop that keen awareness in addition to describing the exterior of where I am in the process of creating something. If I'm making a piece of music, I'm looking at where the current state of the music or the song is in comparison to what I want to create. Just about anything, the subject matter, can be the focus of the creative process. So from that vantage point, it's not about becoming conscious. It's not about the process of becoming so aware that we're trying to get more aware of our own wisdom and things. That happens naturally in creating, because as we hold the space between what we want and what we have, naturally our resources are going to be called upon to resolve this difference. So in order for you to really create, the first step is for you to recognize your attentional weaknesses. Which one of these concentration areas is the one that gets the best of you, and which one do you like to spend your most time in? Because your biggest strength can become a liability when you're under pressure. Number 2 is recognize those situations, those environments that get you in trouble. And maybe you can get high leverage immediately with low cost by just changing your environment a bit in accordance with your attentional weakness and your attentional strengths. Number 3 is, what about team? Is maybe doing it with relationship, doing it with others, can really help you fill in the gaps in what's needed to create effectively. So it's not all on you. You're not the rugged individualist, but you surrender to the process of getting help. And your ego isn't getting the best of you to receive help. But you know that you're vulnerable and you're strong enough to be weak, and that makes you strategic. So you have a tendency towards creating because you're willing to get help, and you can see where other people have strengths and things where you don't. That's a great thing. And lastly is giving yourself space to be wrong. I mean, having the comfort level with your own ignorance to be a learner. One of the things you get immediately when you start creating creations in your life is that you're going to get it wrong. Inevitably, the process of creating is a series of making mistakes until you find the right way forward. And those mistakes mean that you don't take yourself so seriously where everything is personal. I mean, current reality never can define you as a person. And the minute you separate your identity from it, you can use failures as assets. And it actually becomes quite fun because then current reality becomes the greatest teacher you've ever had. And you can step back and look at it not as some daunting force that's going to be the bearer of bad news, but just the news. And it gives you a sort of baseline, a second-person orientation to the facts, rather than first-person orientation of what's happening to me. It's what's happening as me or what's happening for me in that sense. And you're taking an orientation to learning rather than just performing. If I'm performing, all I'm doing is doing it right for the first time. It's wonderful to think about preventing mistakes, but if you're creating something new and bringing it into being separate from what you know, you're going to have experimentation, try certain things, and you're going to make all sorts of interesting blunders. And those are going to be very, very useful places for you to gather capability, build capacity, and make good strategic choices. The question is, can you hold the space for the distance required so that learning can move current reality by taking action to the intention, to the desired state, to the vision, to the place where they're both the same? Once a creation appears and we germinate it, create it, we assimilate it, we complete on it, and it comes into our life, and we live in the universe of what we just made. And that's so neat. It's as if the fulfillment comes afterwards. During the process, it's not rewards-based because there's a lot of good days and bad days. Talk to anybody on Broadway. They do 7 shows a week. They create art at that level with a high level of discipline. So we do have certain choices we make that are just essentially motivated by outcomes. It doesn't matter how we feel about them, but we become self-reliant with a good, reliable process because we're focusing on what we're trying to create. And you don't need to be creative to create. Creating and creativity are not the same. Creativity is great for free associating, brainstorming, coming up with ideas and things, imagining. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to create any better. I've had days when I'm not creative at all and brought something into being because I did what it took to create it. And I acted on behalf of the outcome, and it came into reality. Or there's days when I'm very, very creative, but I'm not creating. So these are not the same important things to keep in mind. The first step would be start creating. Start setting up this practice of being in the moment and in the future at the same time, and holding the space between where I am now in relationship to where I want to be. And you could start by making a bouquet right now. You could start by making a cooking item. You could start by making a song or a poem. You could start by creating an experience or making a space. Just about anything where you put your focus on the creation, not yourself. And then as you go through the process, you're going to be observing current reality, knowing your attentional propensity, shifting rapidly between the different ways in which you're concentrating, keeping your stress in check. And if you need some stress management, that's another audio that I'm going to make, is there's ways to keep your stress in check so that your attentional processes are more fluent and flexible to deliver on the demand, on the required kind of output where your creative act is going to improve your effectiveness, because stress is such a key component to keep your attentional processes moving, shaking, fluent, and flexible to shift rapidly between narrowing, broadening, external, internal. You should be able to move about as you create and be flexible to improve the possibility of what you're performing into and increase the chances for learning. One of the things about creating that I love is that it makes you act more instantly, is that you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have the how before the yes. The way through how is yes. You start with yes courageously, and then you create, and then you know the process is taking iterative steps and making strategic adjustments along the way, staying objective. And as you do that, you become better and better at creating creations you desire in your life. And your life can be the subject matter of the creative process. Isn't that great? And so happy creating. I hope you learned a few things about the different ways you pay attention. We have a great assessment that we have coaching clients do at the beginning of a coaching relationship. And your coaching journey starts with self-awareness. And that your best weapon as a leader is self-knowledge. And knowing your weaknesses is the most important thing. And knowing your strengths as well as others. It helps you become a great leader and also put a great team around you. We use an inventory that's used by the Olympic training centers and some very interesting companies, and the military as well as the police units, and the Underwater Demolition School for the Navy SEALs uses it. It's a mental toughness tool called the Attentional and Interpersonal Style. And Dr. Robert Nideffer was the original founder of this tool, and I've been using it for the last 20 plus years with my coach clients. I've done thousands of TAISes, T-A-I-S, the Attentional and Interpersonal Style. If you'd like more information about it, you can go to highlevelperformance.com and request a discovery call or look into getting yourself coached or your team coached, and we'd be happy to help. We provide high-level performance education and private elite coaching to executives and their teams, and we provide great work for some very interesting organizations that are really seeking to move towards high-level performance to create the visions and the dreams that they want. And everything we talked about today of being in the moment and being in the future is at the very centerpiece, the heartbeat of what they try to do in the ethos of their company. Anyway, I look forward to meeting you, and I appreciate any of your feedback on this, and happy creating. Thank you.